This is Brynne's student, my mother said, and pointed at my own daughter. We were standing in the lobby of the Hartwell Conservatory, 2 days before the state finals, and a woman from the scholarship committee had just asked who taught the little girl in the blue dress. My mother answered before I could open my mouth. She put her hand on Posy's shoulder. My Posy, 8 years old, my whole heart in a recital cardigan, and gave the committee woman my sister's name, Brynne, the accomplished one, the one with the studio and the certificate on the wall. Posy looked up at me across the lobby and didn't say anything. She'd been taught not to. For 2 years they'd done this. 2 years of my daughter playing as someone else's prize, my sister's name on the entry forms, the scholarship checks going to a household that wasn't mine. I'd sat in the back of every room and said nothing. What I did at the finals, when the judge called Posy up to thank her family, that's the part none of them saw coming. I'm Marit, 36, and the woman who pointed at my child like a display piece had no idea the only person Posy had ever truly learned from was sitting 10 feet away, holding her coat. Let me tell you how it got this far. It started small, the way these things do. It always starts with a favor. 3 years ago, Posy was 5 and already playing things she had no business playing. Not because anyone pushed her, because she'd crawl up onto the bench while I cooked dinner and pick out the melody of whatever had been on the radio. Both hands, no mistakes. I taught piano then the way I still do, out of a converted sunroom in a rented half of a duplex, 11 students, $30 a lesson, the kind of work my family had decided long ago was a hobby that hadn't grown up. My sister Brynne taught too. That was the difference everyone agreed on. Brynne had the conservatory affiliation, the recital hall downtown, the website with the soft focus photo. Brynne had married a man named Davenport who sold commercial real estate, and they had the house with the room they called the studio. And our parents talked about Brynne's career the way you'd talk about weather you were proud of. I had a kid and a duplex and a husband who'd left when Posy was 2. And I want you to understand what that scholarship money actually was to a household like mine, because the math is the wound. 11 students at $30 a lesson is $330 a good week, less when someone's sick or the holidays come or a family moves. I play weddings on weekends to close the gap. The rent on the duplex eats the first 10 days of every month before I've bought a single bag of groceries. A $5,000 stipend to me is not a luxury. It is the difference between Posy having her own real instrument someday and Posy practicing for the rest of her childhood on an upright with a key that doesn't work. It is a year I don't lie awake doing arithmetic. To my sister, with the Davenport house and the commercial real estate husband, that same $5,000 was a line item in a studio budget. They took grocery money out of a child's mouth and called it development. That's the thing about being the second draft. They don't only take the credit, they take the credit while telling you that you couldn't have afforded the thing they're taking the credit for, and somewhere in the back of your throat you almost believe them. So when my mother called and said the family wanted to invest in Posy's gift, I cried a little, alone, in my kitchen. I thought it meant they finally saw her. I should have asked what investment meant to them. By the time I understood, the forms were already filed under another name. Here's what none of them knew I would eventually do about it. But first, you have to understand how easy it was to make me small. I grew up in that family as the second draft. Brynne was the recital. I was the audience. Brynne got the lessons with the imported teacher. I got whatever Brynne grew bored of. When I was 9, I won a regional competition my parents forgot to attend because Brynne had a dress fitting. My mother's exact words when I told her I'd placed first were, "That's nice. Did you thank the judges?" I had. I always thanked the judges. I'd been raised to be grateful for the chance to be overlooked. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it explains the thing I'm least proud of. When they started doing it to my daughter, some buried part of me recognized the shape of it and thought, this is just how it is. The wound never goes away. It just waits for someone smaller than you to hand it down to. The first competition was a county-level thing, the autumn Posy turned 6. Brynne offered to handle the logistics. She said the entry portal was confusing, that the conservatory students got a streamlined process, that it'd be simpler to register Posy through her studio. I was working a wedding that weekend. I play receptions for cash on the side. And I was grateful. Grateful again. I didn't see the program until afterward when my mother proudly showed me a photo on her phone. Studio of Brynne Davenport, it read. And under it, pupil, age 6. No name, just pupil, as if my daughter were a category. It's just how the conservatory lists the little ones, Brynne said when I asked. Privacy. You wouldn't want her full name out there anyway. She smiled when she said it. She had a way of making her lies sound like they were protecting you. Posy placed first. The little ribbon went home in Brynne's bag. I want to tell you I said something. I didn't. I told myself it was a ribbon. There was a moment at that county competition I keep coming back to. After Posy played, and she was the best child in that gymnasium by a distance you could measure from the parking lot, a woman came up to us in the hallway, another mother, and said to Posy, "You were wonderful, sweetheart. Who's your teacher?" And Posy, 6 years old, turned and pointed at me. Just pointed, simple, the way children point at the moon. "Her," she said. "That's my mom." Before I could even smile, my mother appeared from nowhere. She has always been able to appear from nowhere when a narrative needs correcting, and laughed her warm, public laugh and said, "Oh, she's being modest. This little one studies at the Davenport Conservatory Studio. We're very lucky." And she steered the woman away with a hand on her elbow, and the woman nodded and forgot, and Posy looked up at me, confused, her small, pointed truth erased mid-air. I should have said something then. The first time. When it would have been one woman in a hallway and not 400 people in a hall. I didn't. I told myself it wasn't worth a scene. I have thought about that hallway every day since, because every lie that grows large enough to need a stage started as a small one that nobody corrected in a hallway. That night, Posy asked me why Aunt Brynne got to hold her trophy, and I didn't have an answer that wasn't a lie. So I told her the truth was complicated and that I was proud of her, and she fell asleep against my arm in the car. I stayed up. I sat at our old upright, the one with the chipped C below middle C that we'd both learned to play around like it was a friend with a limp. And I played until 2 in the morning, quiet, with the soft pedal down, so I wouldn't wake her. That chipped key is the only honest thing in this whole story. Remember it. It comes back. By the spring, the favor had become a system, and I still hadn't noticed the price. Brynne started coaching Posy on Saturdays. That was how it was framed. Extra polish, conservatory technique, things a duplex teacher couldn't offer. My mother drove Posy over. I let her because I was teaching my own students Saturday mornings and because I wanted to believe my family was finally folding my daughter into the part of itself that mattered. For an hour a week, Brynne sat beside Posy and corrected her wrists. The other 6 days, I taught her everything else. But the calendar only recorded Saturdays. The calendar belonged to Brynne. I should have seen it then, the structure of it. 6 days of me, 1 day of her, and 1 name on every page. Before I go any further, if this is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I genuinely love seeing how far this travels. Now, let me get back to the spring. Everything started to tilt. The first money I learned about by accident. I was at my parents' house dropping off Posy's inhaler before the Saturday coaching, and there was an envelope on the counter from something called the Aldridge Family Foundation. I wouldn't have looked, except Posy's photo was paperclipped to it. Her recital photo, the blue cardigan, the gap where she'd lost a tooth, and a check. Made out to Brynne Davenport Studio. $1,200. The memo line said, Young Artist Development Grant. I stood there holding my daughter's inhaler. "See, that's for her enrichment," my mother said, taking the envelope out of my eye line with the smooth ease of someone who'd done it before. "Lessons aren't free, Marit. Brynne's putting real resources into this. You should be thanking her. It has Posy's picture on it. Because she's the talent. That's the whole point of the application. You want her to have opportunities, don't you?" My mother looked at me the way she'd looked at me my entire life, like I was being difficult about a kindness. Or would you rather she end up doing weddings? I left the inhaler. I left the envelope. I drove home and I told myself the money went to Posy somehow, into the lessons, into something. I am ashamed of how long I let that sentence work on me. It was the spring before the finals that I found the second check, and that one I couldn't explain away. This is the part where I stopped being able to pretend. It was a Sunday. Posy was at a birthday party, and I'd offered to pick up a casserole dish my mother had loaned me, which is the kind of small chore that keeps a family attached to you even when it's eating you. My mother wasn't home. My father let me in and went back to his recliner, and the casserole dish was in the dining room, and on the dining table was a spread of paperwork that Brynne had clearly been working through, because Brynne's reading glasses were sitting right on top of it. State Youth Conservatory Scholarship, application packet. I saw the words before I decided to look. And I looked. Applicant teacher of record, Brynne Davenport. Performing student, listed as a minor pupil of the Davenport Studio, age 8. Award value, if selected. A full year of conservatory tuition plus a $5,000 stipend disbursed to the studio of record. $5,000. To the studio. Not to the child. Not to the child's mother. To the studio of record, which was my sister, who had taught my daughter how to hold her wrists on Saturdays and nothing else. I heard my father turn a page of his newspaper in the next room. I heard the clock. I heard my own pulse in my ears, which is a thing I'd read about and never believed. I put the glasses back exactly where they'd been. I took the casserole dish. I said goodbye to my father, who said without looking up. And I sat in my car in their driveway and I did the math. 2 years. 2 competitions a year, sometimes 3. Grants, stipends, development funds, a scholarship now worth more than I made in 4 months. All of it routed through a name that wasn't my daughter's and wasn't mine. They hadn't borrowed my child's talent. They'd incorporated it. I want you to understand I'm not a dramatic person. I teach 8-year-olds to count rests. I keep my voice down for a living, but I sat in that driveway and I felt something old and quiet finally stand up inside me. That was the moment the favor became a theft, and I finally let myself call it one. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I want to be honest about that because I think a lot of you would have, and you'd have been right to. But I knew this family. I knew that if I walked back into that house waving the scholarship packet, my mother would have the story rewritten before I finished the sentence. I'd be the jealous sister, the one who couldn't be happy for Posy's opportunities, the one who'd ruin a child's future over pride. So I drove home and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went to the piano with the chipped C and I sat my daughter down and I asked her a question I'd been too afraid to ask. Posy, when you play at the competitions, who do you think you're playing for? She thought about it the way she thinks about everything. Seriously, with her tongue at the corner of her mouth. For the judges, she said, and for you. I always look for you in the back. Do you tell anyone that I'm your teacher? She went quiet. 8 years old, and she knew. That's the part that broke me, that she'd already learned to be careful with the answer. Grandma says I should say Aunt Brynne. She says it makes it special. Posy looked at her hands on the keys. But it's not true. You taught me Claire de Lune. Aunt Brynne just fixes my wrists. I made myself smile. I told her she was right and that the truth was always allowed in this house. Our house, the duplex with the bad key. And then I tucked her in and went back downstairs and understood that I'd let my daughter carry a lie because I was used to carrying one myself. Have you ever realized you'd been training your own child to disappear the way you were trained? If that lands somewhere true for you, tell me below. I read every single one. 2 weeks later, they threw a dinner, and at that dinner, I watched them sell my daughter to a room full of strangers. It was billed as a celebration, my mother's word. The Aldridge Family Foundation, the people whose $1,200 check I'd held over the counter, were hosting a reception for their young grant recipients, and Posy was to play, at Brynne's house. In the room they called the studio. I was invited the way you invite the caterer's assistant, told the time, told what to bring, told to keep Posy's hair neat. I came early. I always come early. It's a habit from a childhood where being late meant being talked about. The studio had been staged like a magazine. Brynne's certificate had been moved to a more flattering wall. There were little printed cards on a side table, cream stock, with Posy's recital photo and a paragraph underneath it. I picked one up before anyone could stop me. Posy, age 8, it read. A rising young pianist of the Davenport Studio, developed under the mentorship of Brynne Davenport. Developed, like a property, like film. Don't crease those. my mother said, lifting the card out of my hand. "They're for the donors." The donors arrived in soft sweaters and expensive shoes, and they cooed at Posy, and they shook Brynne's hand, and a man from the foundation, older, kind-faced, a checkbook for a heart, crouched down to Posy's level and asked her how long she'd been studying with the wonderful Mrs. Davenport. Posy looked across the room at me. I was standing by the snack table holding a stack of cocktail napkins someone had handed me to fold. Posy said. "She's been with Brynne almost 2 years," my mother answered, smooth as a railing, her hand landing on Posy's shoulder. "She practically lives in this studio." The man smiled and patted Posy's head and moved on, and Posy kept looking at me, and I made myself smile back and mouthed the words, "It's okay," even though it was not okay, even though every cell in my body was standing up and screaming, because what could I do? Say "actually" in front of the donors and become, instantly, the unstable sister ruining a child's reception. Then Posy played. In the studio that wasn't hers, for the donors who thought she was someone else's, my daughter played a Schumann piece I had taught her on a Tuesday in February, and she played it beautifully, and the whole room turned to Brynne to applaud the teacher, and Brynne accepted it with both hands. There was one more thing at that reception. As the donors were leaving, the kind-faced man from the foundation stopped in front of the side table of cream cards, picked one up, and slid it into his jacket pocket like a souvenir. Posy's photo, Posy's paragraph, my sister's name. "Such a special little girl," he said to my mother. "You must be so proud of Brynne." "We are," my mother said. "We always knew she had it in her to give back." To give back. As if my daughter's 2 years of practice were a charitable contribution from my sister. I stood by the snack table, and I understood that the lie had grown a vocabulary now. It had words like development and mentorship and giving back. It had printed cards and a videographer and donors who repeated it without knowing. It had become, in the most literal sense, the official story. And official stories don't lose to a snooping sister with a grievance. They only lose to the one witness an official story can never silence in advance. I folded 40 cocktail napkins into perfect triangles. I counted them later, alone in my car. 40. One for every guest who'd just been told a lie about my child and clapped for it. That was the night the thing in me that had stood up in the driveway started, very quietly, to walk. Because here is what I understood, folding those napkins. They were never going to stop. This wasn't a phase or a misunderstanding or a favor that had drifted. It was a business, and my daughter was the product, and her name was the one thing about her they'd already decided didn't matter. And the state finals, the biggest stage, the biggest check, the most witnesses, was 5 weeks away. I drove home and I didn't cry. I made a list instead. I'm a teacher, I make lists. But every line I wrote came back to the same wall. The state finals were in 5 weeks, and I had no studio, no website, no certificate on a wall. What I had was the truth, and no clean way to use it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about asymmetric fights. When the other side controls the story, evidence isn't a weapon. It's an invitation to be called a liar. If I showed up with the scholarship packet, they'd say I'd snooped. If I demanded my name on the entry, they'd say I was sabotaging Posy's chances at the last minute. Out of spite. Out of jealousy. The whole machine of my family was built to make my objection sound like the crime. I needed the truth to come out of someone they couldn't accuse. So I started, very quietly, to find out exactly how the entry worked. I called the conservatory's finals office, just a parent asking logistics questions, nothing strange about that. When did students arrive? Where did families sit? Was there a rehearsal? The woman who answered was named Carol, and Carol was the kind of competent that the world runs on and never thanks. She told me the schedule, and then, almost offhand, she told me something that changed the shape of everything. At the finals, the head adjudicator likes to bring each child up after their piece, Carol said. Just a tradition. He asks them a couple of questions, lets them thank whoever they want to thank. The audience loves it. It humanizes the whole thing. Lets them thank whoever they want to thank. I thanked Carol more than the question deserved, and I hung up, and I sat very still in my sunroom full of other people's children's drawings. I wasn't going to expose anyone. I wasn't going to wave a single piece of paper. I was going to do something far simpler and far more dangerous. I was going to let my daughter tell the truth, on a stage, in front of everyone, if she chose to. And I was going to make sure in the weeks before that she understood she was allowed to. That was my whole plan. Hand the truth back to the only person it actually belonged to. But a plan that rests on an 8-year-old's courage needs a foundation under it, and I went looking for mine in the one place I knew the lie had left a footprint. I'd remembered something, a name. 2 years earlier, before Posy, there'd been another little girl in Brynne's orbit, a student named Hollis, whose mother, Dana, used to wait in the same parking lot I waited in. Dana and I had traded the bored half-smiles of women whose children were inside being shaped by someone else. Then Hollis had stopped coming, abruptly, mid-season, and I'd never thought twice about it. Children quit piano all the time. I found Dana's number in an old group text from a long-dead recital chat. I told myself I was just asking after Hollis. I wasn't. I was asking whether I was crazy. Donna remembered me right away. We did the small talk, and then I said, as lightly as I could, "Can I ask you something strange?" When Hollis competed, whose studio was she entered under? The line went quiet in a way that told me everything before she said a word. "Brynne's," Dana said finally. "Why? Did Hollis ever win anything? A grant? A stipend?" "She won a youth award her second year. $1,100. A pause. "It went to the studio. Brynne said that was standard, that the studio reinvested it in the students. I was new to all of it. I didn't know what was standard." Another pause, longer. "Marit, why are you asking me this?" So I told her. "Not all of it. Enough. The check with Posy's photo, the scholarship packet, the teacher of record." Dana exhaled, and it was the exhale of a woman who has been carrying a small wrong stone in her shoe for 2 years and just learned it was a real stone. "I pulled Hollis out because it started to feel off," she said. "I couldn't have told you why. Brynne kept being the one in the photos. Hollis kept being a pupil of the studio. One day, Hollis asked me why her name was never on anything, and I didn't have an answer, and I stopped bringing her." Her voice tightened. "I thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was the problem." "You weren't the problem," I said. "You were the first one to notice. We talked for an hour. Dana didn't have documents, neither did I, not really, and even if I had, I'd already decided documents were the wrong weapon for this family. But Dana gave me something better than a document. She gave me certainty. This had a pattern. It had a history. It had a name before it had Posy's. I wasn't a jealous sister inventing a grievance. I was the second mother to stand in that parking lot and feel her child being quietly renamed. I want to tell you that talking to Dana made me feel strong. For about a day, it did. And then the doubt came back the way it always does, dressed as reasonableness, because I realized that knowing the truth and being able to survive telling it are two completely different things. And the one person who could destroy my whole plan with a single phone call was the woman who'd raised me to stay quiet. So I did what reasonable, frightened people do. I tried to find the safe version of bravery. I went looking for a lawyer. I sat in a small office that smelled of carpet cleaner and a printer running too hot, and I laid it all out for a tired woman named Renata, who did family and small claims work out of a strip mall near the highway. The checks, the grants, the teacher of record, the scholarship packet I'd seen on the dining table, Dana and Hollis before Posy. I expected her to hand me a sword. She didn't. "Can you prove the talent is your daughter's and the teaching is yours?" Renata asked. "Documents, lesson logs, records of who paid for what." "I teach her at my kitchen piano," I said. "I don't write myself receipts for raising my own child." "Then here's what happens." She took off her glasses. She wasn't unkind. She was just honest, which is rarer and more useful. "You file something. Your mother and sister hire someone better than me because they have the house and the studio and the air of legitimacy. They say you're an unstable single mother, jealous of your successful sister, who let your child be developed for 2 years and only objected when there was money on the table. They say you're using the kid as a weapon. And the worst part?" She leaned back. "On paper, some of that even looks true. You did stay quiet for 2 years. A judge can't see why. A judge sees the timeline. The room got very quiet, the way the dining room had gotten quiet over the scholarship packet. "So I have nothing," I said. "You have a child who knows the truth," Renata said, "and that's worth more than anything I can file. But it's not a thing a court is built to hold. Courts are built for paper." She slid my notes back across the desk. "My honest advice? Don't make this about evidence. The second it's evidence, it's a contest, and they're better funded for a contest than you are. Find a way to make it about something nobody can cross-examine." I drove home with her sentence rattling in me, something nobody can cross-examine. A document can be questioned, a complaint can be reframed, a jealous sister can be invented out of any objection I made. But there is one thing in this whole story that no lawyer my mother could afford would ever be able to twist on a witness stand, because it isn't a claim or a receipt or a grievance. It's a little girl asked a simple question, telling the truth in her own voice. That was the night the plan stopped being a wish and became a decision. I wasn't going to bring a weapon to the finals. I was going to bring my daughter, and the truth she already carried, and the one thing the entire machine of my family had never thought to take from her, permission to say it out loud. But first, I had to survive 5 weeks of helping my sister prepare my own child. The Saturday coaching sessions got longer as the finals approached, and now my mother wanted me there for them, which was new. I understood why. Posy had started asking questions at home, small ones, but they'd reached my mother somehow. So they wanted me in the room, visible, complicit. If I sat there nodding while Brynne coached her student, then later, if anything came out, I'd have been part of it. They were stitching me into the lie with my own thread. I went. I sat in the corner with my coat in my lap, and I watched my sister teach my daughter the piece she'd play at finals, Debussy's Clair de Lune, the one I'd taught Posy over 8 months at the upright with the bad key, note by note, the one Posy could already play in her sleep. "Softer in the left hand here," Brynne said, tapping the score. "Float it." "Mommy says to think about the moon coming out from behind a cloud," Posy said. The room went still for half a second. My mother's eyes flicked to me. Brynne smiled her protective smile. "Well," she said, "that's a sweet way to think about it. But let's keep it technical for the finals, okay? Technical wins." Posy looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod. "Play it however you understand it," the nod said. "I'll be in the back." "Okay," Posy said, and she played the left hand exactly the way I'd taught her, the moon coming out from behind the cloud. And Brynne said good because there was nothing else to say, because it was perfect, because it was mine. That was the day I knew it would work, not because of a document, because of the way my daughter looked at me to find out what was true. But knowing it would work and watching them tighten the screws were two different experiences, and over those weeks, they tightened the screws in a way I hadn't seen coming. They didn't get louder, they got more thorough. The next Saturday, there was a videographer, a man with a real camera, hired, my mother said, to build Posy's portfolio. He filmed her playing. He filmed Brynne adjusting her wrists. He filmed Brynne talking to the lens about the studio's philosophy of nurturing young artists from the ground up. He did not film me because I was in the corner with my coat in my lap, and the man with the camera had been told clearly that I was not part of the frame. Then they had Posy do an interview. On camera. My 8-year-old scripted. "And who taught you to play, sweetheart?" the videographer asked, reading from a card my mother had handed him. Posy looked at me in the corner. I didn't move. I'd promised her she could tell the truth on the stage that mattered, but I had not promised to fight every camera in every room, because if I fought this one, they'd simply remove me from the rooms, and then I'd lose my sightline to the only stage that counted. So I held still and I let it hurt. "My studio," Posy said quietly, the words placed in her mouth, and looked down at the keys. That night she cried. Not about the camera, about the lie. "I said the wrong answer," she told me, 8 years old, ashamed of a thing the adults had done to her. "I said the studio, but it's you." I held her until she stopped, and I understood the new cruelty of it. They weren't just stealing the credit anymore. They were teaching my daughter to feel guilty for the truth. That's the part I will never forgive, the part that turned my quiet plan into something with iron in it. They could have my name off the forms, they could have the checks, but they were not going to make my child ashamed of being mine. "You didn't say the wrong answer," I told her. They gave you the wrong question. There's a difference, and it's not your fault. And very soon someone is going to ask you the right one. And when they do, you're going to be ready. What's the right question? Who taught you? I said. Just that. Someday soon, someone with a microphone is going to ask you who taught you, and you get to answer it however is true. She fell asleep believing me. I lay awake, making sure I'd be telling the truth. What happened the following Saturday almost made me give up the whole thing. My mother cornered me in the kitchen. She'd been building to it. I could tell by the way she dried a clean glass. You've been strange, she said. Posy's picking up on it. She's distracted. She's playing better than she ever has. She's playing for Brynne's studio, Marit. And Brynne has put 2 years into this. Do you understand what's at stake on Saturday? That scholarship is a path, conservatory track, real teachers, the kind of future you... She stopped herself, but only to choose a sharper edge. The kind of future you couldn't give her if you taught 1,000 weddings. There it was, the blow under the blow. She's my daughter, I said, quietly. I keep my voice down for a living. And whose name gets her in the door? Be realistic. Nobody's writing a $5,000 check to a divorced piano teacher in a duplex. They're writing it to a credential. Brynne is the credential. You should be on your knees grateful your sister is willing to lend it. She set the glass down. Don't you dare make this about your ego on Saturday. Not in front of all those people. Not when it's Posy who pays for it. That's the cruelest thing about people like my mother. They aim the gun at you and tell you the child is the one who'll get hurt if you flinch. I almost flinched. I drove home shaking. I thought, she's right. What if I cost Posy the scholarship? What if I'm doing this for me? The doubt sat on my chest for 3 days. The old training is strong. It tells you that your dignity is selfishness, and your silence is love. What pulled me out of it was Posy at the upright on Wednesday night, playing Claire de Lune and stopping at the chipped C the way she always did, that little hitch where she'd learned to lean around the broken note. She looked up at me. Mommy, at the finals, can I look for you in the back like always? Always, I said. Even if Grandma says don't? I knelt down by the bench so we were eye to eye. Posy, on Saturday, you can look anywhere you want. And if anyone asks you a question up there, you tell them whatever is true. That's the whole job. You play your piece and you tell the truth. You will never, ever be in trouble with me for telling the truth. Do you understand? She nodded. She was 8. She didn't fully understand. But she understood the part that mattered, that I'd just handed her permission no one else in the family would give her. The doubt didn't come back after that. Some boundaries you don't set with a speech. You set them with a promise to a child. And then, 3 days before the finals, my mother played the card she'd been holding the whole time, and for one terrible night, I thought I'd lost. She didn't call me. That was the tell. My mother only stops calling when she's decided to go around you. I found out because Posy mentioned it at dinner, casually, the way children drop bombs while asking for more peas. Grandma says I might go live with Aunt Brynne for school, Posy said. For the conservatory. She says it's closer and Daddy thinks it's a good idea. I put down my fork very carefully. Daddy said that? Grandma talked to him on the phone. Posy pushed her peas around. I don't want to. I want to stay here. But Grandma said it's not really up to you. It's not really up to you. My mother's exact cadence coming out of my 8-year-old's mouth. Here is what you need to understand. My ex-husband, Posy's father, left when she was 2 and has been a name on a child support form ever since. Not cruel, just absent. The kind of man who'll agree to anything that costs him nothing and makes him feel involved. And my mother knew that. She knew that if she could get him to nod along to a conservatory opportunity, she could turn a custody arrangement I'd built alone into a wedge. She wasn't trying to take Posy. She was trying to remind me that she could make my life expensive and frightening if I embarrassed the family on Saturday. I called him that night. He was vague and defensive in the way of a man who'd been flattered into a conversation he didn't understand. Your mom just said it might be better for Posy. More resources. I didn't agree to anything. A pause. Is it not better for Posy? I'm her teacher, I said. I'm the resource. Okay. I just don't want to be the bad guy here, Marit. He never does. That's his whole personality. I hung up and I sat in the dark of my sunroom and I felt the old floor open under me. This was the move I hadn't prepared for. I'd planned for the public lie. I had not planned for them to threaten the one thing I could not survive losing. If I went through with Saturday, if I let Posy tell the truth on that stage, would my mother make good on this? Would I be in a lawyer's office by summer, the unstable sister, the one who'd destabilized the child for her own ego? Exactly the story they'd always told? For about 6 hours, I decided to call it off. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Around 2 in the morning, I had a whole speech ready for Posy about how she should just thank whoever the grown-ups wanted, that it didn't matter, that I'd find another way. I sat at the upright with the chipped C under my finger, and I rehearsed becoming small again, because becoming small had always kept us safe. And then I thought about Dana in the parking lot, the first mother, who'd pulled her daughter out and spent 2 years thinking she was the problem. I thought about how the lie only worked because every woman it touched decided, alone, in the dark, that surviving meant going quiet. I wasn't going to be the second one to teach that lesson, and I wasn't going to teach it to Posy. So at dawn, I did the one thing my mother never expected because it was the one thing I'd never done. I called her bluff in writing, a calm, dated email to my ex and copied to no lawyer because I had none, just 2 clear sentences. Posy's schooling and home are not changing. Any conversation about her future goes through me directly, not through my mother. I hit send. I didn't threaten. I didn't explain. I just refused to be afraid in language they could not later twist. My mother called me 40 minutes later, furious in the controlled way that's worse than yelling, and I let it go to voicemail, and I drove Posy to school, and I understood that I had just done, in private and on paper, a smaller version of exactly what I was about to ask my daughter to do in public. I had told the truth plainly and declined to apologize for it. The floor had not swallowed me. I was still standing. And the finals were 2 days away. The night before the finals, my sister called me, and for one strange moment I thought she was going to confess. "I know you've been weird about all this," Brynne said. "No hello. We don't really do hellos. And look, tomorrow's a big deal, for her. I need to know you're going to be normal." "I'm going to be in the back," I said. "Like always." A pause. I heard her house behind her, the dishwasher, the television, the easy hum of a life that had room for a studio. And then, for 1 second, Brynne sounded almost human. "She's really good, you know," my sister said. "Posy, she's the real thing, better than I was." "I know." "It's not like I don't—" Brynne stopped. Whatever it was, she didn't deserve to say it out loud, and some part of her knew that. "Just be normal tomorrow, Marit. For her sake." "For her sake," I agreed. I let her have her 1 human second. "I'm not in the business of pretending that people who hurt you are monsters with no insides." Brynne knew exactly what she was doing, and she'd convinced herself it was generosity, and both of those things were true at once. That's what made it bearable to forgive her later, and unforgivable in the moment. I hung up. I went to the upright. I didn't play. I just put my hand flat on the keys, the chipped C under my ring finger, and I waited for morning. There was a rehearsal the morning of, 2 hours before the doors opened, and it nearly undid me, because for the first time in 2 years, I almost lost Posy to the version of herself they'd built. Finalists got 15 minutes each to feel the hall, test the piano, learn where the bench wanted to sit. My mother had arranged the schedule so that Brynne walked Posy out onto the rehearsal stage while I waited in the wings with the other parents. I watched my sister kneel at the bench beside my daughter, adjusting the height, murmuring conservatory things, and I watched Posy nod and go still and small, the way she went small at the donor reception, the way I used to go small in that house. "Remember," Brynne said, loud enough for me to hear it travel, "when they bring you up after, you keep it simple. You thank the studio. You thank the people who believed in you, short and sweet. Don't ramble." She was coaching the lie. Right there, on the rehearsal stage, my sister was rehearsing my daughter to thank her in public. She'd heard about the adjudicator tradition, too. Of course she had, and she'd decided to get ahead of it. Posy played 4 bars and stopped. She looked out into the empty hall, toward the wings, looking for me, and the lights weren't on yet, so she could actually see me, and I saw the question on her face. The same question, the one she'd asked her whole short life. Who am I supposed to be today? And for one cold second, I almost gave her the safe answer. I almost nodded toward Brynne, because everything in me that had been raised in that family wanted to keep her safe, and safe meant going along. Safe meant short and sweet. Safe meant the studio. Then a stagehand flipped a switch and the house lights came up, and the moment broke, and a voice from the back of the hall said, "Next finalist, please, we're running tight." A woman with a clipboard and a headset, and the unbothered competence of someone who'd herded 1,000 nervous children. "Carol." I recognized her voice from the phone before I recognized her face. She caught my eye in the wings. She didn't know me, but she gave me the small, weary fellow traveler nod that competent women give each other across a chaotic room, and somehow that nod put my spine back. I knelt down when Posy came off the stage. Brynne had already turned to talk to my mother. I had maybe 10 seconds. "Hey," I whispered. "You okay?" "Aunt Brynne says I have to say short and sweet." "You can say whatever's true," I said. "You remember the rule?" Posy nodded. "Play my piece and tell the truth. And you'll never be in trouble with me for it. Even today. Especially today." I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll be in the back." "Where do you look?" "The back," Posy said, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. My mother appeared over my shoulder. "What are you two whispering about?" "Nothing, Mom," I said, and stood, and for once my voice didn't drop. "Just wishing her luck." My mother looked at me for a long moment, sensing something she couldn't name, the way animals sense weather. Then the doors opened and the families began to file in, and there was no more time, and I went to find row 11. The Hartwell Conservatory finals are held in a real hall, the kind with a raised stage and good light, and the parents sit in cushioned rows that creak when you lean forward. We arrived as a family, which is to say I arrived behind my family. My mother in pearls. My father in the suit he wears to funerals and to anything he considers important, which tells you what he thinks competitions are. Brynne in cream, the color of someone who expects to be photographed. Posy in the blue cardigan, holding my hand in the parking lot until we got to the doors, where my mother took her other hand and steered her toward the registration table and away from me. "This is Brynne's student," my mother told the committee woman, "the moment I told you about at the start. The moment that's been waiting at the front of this story like a held breath." Posy in the middle. Brynne's name in the air. My daughter looking back at me across the lobby with a question on her face that I answered with a nod. "In the back," I mouthed. "Look for me in the back." I found my seat. Row 11, on the aisle, where I'd have a clean sightline to the stage. My family sat down front, in the section the registration woman had pointed them to, the section for the families of finalists, which apparently I was not. I sat in row 11, and I held Posy's coat in my lap because someone had handed it to me, the way they always handed me the coats, and I let them, because today the coat didn't matter. The first finalists played. They were good. Some were better than good. A boy did a Chopin etude with hands too small for it, and you could see him willing them to be bigger. A girl played Bach with the joyless precision of someone who'd been drilled, and I felt sorry for her, and I thought of Brynne saying technical wins. And the whole time, the adjudicator did exactly what Carol had promised. After each child finished, he rose and crossed to the side of the stage, and brought them up and asked them his 2 questions. "Who taught you? What do you want people to feel?" The boy with the etude thanked his grandmother and a teacher named Mr. Pham, and the room said, "Aw." The drilled girl thanked her mother and her father and her coach in a flat recited list. Each time, I watched the parents in the finalist section glow with the particular warmth of being named in public, of having your years of driving to lessons turned into a sentence a child says into a microphone. Each time, my stomach turned over because I knew that in a few minutes the tradition would reach my daughter, and I had aimed everything I had at that single moment, and I had no idea, none, what an 8-year-old would actually do when the lights were in her eyes and her grandmother was in the front row and her aunt was wearing cream and waiting to be thanked. I'd given her permission. I hadn't given her a script. That was the whole point, and it was also the most frightening thing I have ever done as a parent. I had handed my child the truth and a microphone and stepped back, and I would not be able to help her once she was up there. And if she got scared and said the studio the way she'd said it to the camera, I would have to live with knowing I'd put her in that position for nothing. Down front, I saw my mother lean over and whisper something in Posy's ear before a volunteer led the finalists backstage. I'll never know exactly what she said. I can guess. Short and sweet. Thank the studio. Make us proud. The last reinforcement of 2 years of careful renaming, delivered as a child, walked toward the only stage where it would finally be tested. My hands were not steady then. I'll be honest. I sat in row 11 with a coat in my lap and a roaring in my ears, and I thought, I might have just made everything worse, and there was nothing left to do but find out. Then they called Posy. Not her name. From the Davenport studio, the announcer said, performing Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. And my daughter walked out onto that stage alone, in her blue cardigan, 8 years old, and found the bench and adjusted it the half-inch she always adjusts it, and looked out into the lights. She couldn't see me, the lights were in her eyes, but she looked anyway, out toward the back, toward where she knew I'd be, and I leaned forward in row 11 so that if any light at all reached that far, it would reach me. Then she played. I have heard my daughter play Clair de Lune 500 times. In the sunroom, at the upright, around the broken key. I have heard her play it tired and silly and angry and half asleep. I had never heard it the way she played it that afternoon, in a real hall with real light, alone. She floated the left hand. The moon came out from behind the cloud. And when she reached the bar where the chipped C would have been on our piano, the note that on our broken upright always made her hitch, always made her lean around it like an old friend with a limp, she paused. Just slightly. A held breath of silence where the broken note lived in her body. Then she played the C clean and whole, because this piano wasn't broken, and the room didn't know what they'd just heard. But I did. I heard my daughter carry our broken piano onto a perfect stage and play around a wound that wasn't there anymore. I had told myself I would not cry. I keep my voice down for a living. I cried in row 11 with a child's coat in my lap, and I did not make a sound. She finished. The hall was quiet the way a hall gets quiet only when something real has happened in it. Then it broke into applause, and my mother was on her feet down front, clapping with her hands up high so the people around her would see whose granddaughter that was. And then the head adjudicator stood and crossed to the side of the stage, and held out his hand to my daughter and said into his microphone the sentence I had been waiting 5 weeks for. That was extraordinary. Come here a moment, would you? I'd love for you to tell us. Who do you want to thank for that? The room settled into the warm hush of an audience being handed a sweet moment. My mother sat back down with her hand on her chest. Brynne arranged her face into the gracious half-smile of a teacher about to be named in public. My father checked his watch, then thought better of it. Down front, my whole family leaned the half-inch forward that those creaking chairs allow, ready to receive the credit. Posy took the adjudicator's microphone with 2 hands, the way she holds everything that matters. And here is where it slowed down. Here is where I want you to sit in the room with me, because the rest of it lasted maybe 20 seconds, and I have lived inside those seconds for the rest of my life. The adjudicator smiled down at her. Take your time, he said. Who taught you to play like that? I saw Brynne's chin lift just slightly, getting ready. Posy looked at the lights. She couldn't see any of us, but she didn't need to see me to know where I was. My mom, she said. Just that. 2 words clear into the microphone, carrying all the way to row 11. A small murmur, the kind an audience makes when a child says something sweet. Down front, my mother's smile didn't move yet, because she hadn't understood yet. Brynne's chin was still lifted. They thought my mom was a warm-up. They thought the name was coming next. Their name. The adjudicator, charmed, leaned in. And your mom? Is she a teacher? She teaches piano, Posy said, in our sunroom. She taught me Clair de Lune for 8 months. We have a piano with a broken key, a C, right here. She touched a key on the stage piano without pressing it. And you have to lean around it, but ours is the one I learned on. My mom's name is Marit. She's in the back. She always sits in the back so I can find her. The murmur changed. I felt it change. It is a very specific sound, an audience realizing it has been told the truth about something it didn't know was a question. The adjudicator, who was no fool, glanced down at his card. "From the Davenport studio," it said. He looked at Posy. He looked instinctively at the front row, at the cream dress arranging itself, at the pearls. "And is your teacher down here in the front?" he asked gently, giving everyone a chance. "No," Posy said, with the patience of a child explaining the obvious. "That's my Aunt Brynne and my grandma. Aunt Brynne fixes my wrists on Saturdays. My mom teaches me everything else. She's in the back. Mommy?" And my daughter lifted one hand off the microphone and pointed, past my sister, past my mother, past all of them, out over the warm dark of the hall toward row 11. "Mommy, stand up so they can see you. I want to be calm about this part. I keep my voice down for a living." I stood up. I stood up in row 11 with my daughter's coat sliding off my lap onto the floor, and 400 people turned in their creaking chairs to look at the woman in the back, and the head adjudicator of the state finals raised his hand toward me and said, "There she is. Will you give a hand to this young lady's teacher?" And her mother. The hall applauded. I don't know how long. I couldn't hear it properly over the sound in my own ears. I just stood there, found in the back, while my 8-year-old held a microphone on a stage and finished a thing I had been too afraid to start for 2 years. I have never in my life been prouder or more ashamed of anything than I was in that moment, both at once. And then I looked at the front row. My mother had gone the gray of old paper. She was not smiling. She had her hand still on her chest, but it had become a different gesture entirely, the gesture of someone whose heart is doing something they didn't authorize. Brynne's chin had come down. Her gracious half-smile had fallen off her face and was lying somewhere on the conservatory carpet, and she was looking at her hands in her lap, at the wrists she fixed on Saturdays. The adjudicator was already moving on, warm, gracious, calling the next finalist. The world was kind enough not to make a scene of it. There were no security guards, no gasps, no fainting. That's not how the truth usually arrives. It arrives the way Posy delivered it, plainly, in a child's voice, and then the program continues, and everyone around you quietly recalculates everything they thought they knew. That is the whole climax. A little girl pointed at the back of the room. That was the weapon. It was the only one I'd ever had. I sat back down. I picked up the coat. My hands were steady. I was surprised to find them steady. We didn't speak in the lobby afterward. There wasn't a fight, which I know is what some of you are waiting for. My family doesn't fight in public. They wait until you're in a kitchen. But the public part was over, and the public part was the part that counted. Because in my family, the only thing more powerful than a lie is a lie that everyone has already seen through. Posy ran to me across the lobby. Just ran, full speed, the way she hadn't been allowed to in 2 years, and I caught her, and she said into my neck, "Was that the truth? Was that okay?" And I said, "That was perfect. That was the most perfect thing I have ever heard." And I meant the answer and the piece both. My mother approached us once near the doors. She'd reassembled her face into something composed. "Well," she said, "that was quite a performance." She meant Posy's 2 words, not the Debussy. "Yes," I said, "it was." "You put her up to that." "I told her she was allowed to tell the truth. That's all I ever did." I shifted Posy's weight on my hip. "If the truth was that embarrassing, Mom, it should tell you something about the story you'd built." She didn't have a reply. For the first time in 36 years, my mother looked at me and could not find the line that would turn my objection into my crime. The whole room had heard a child name her teacher. There was no version of this where I was the jealous one. Posy had taken that weapon out of their hands by simply being asked a question and answering it. That's the thing about reframing a truth instead of fighting over it. You can't argue with what a room already saw. The fallout started before we even got to the parking lot, and it didn't come from me. That's the part I want you to understand. I never said a word to a committee. I never filed a complaint. I had decided, weeks before, that my only move was to let the truth out of Posy's mouth and then get out of the way. And the strange, almost frightening thing about the truth is how it keeps moving once it's loose. The man from the Aldridge Foundation found me by the coat racks. The kind-faced one with the checkbook for a heart, who'd crouched down at the reception and asked Posy how long she'd studied with the wonderful Mrs. Davenport. He looked older now than he had 3 weeks ago. "I owe you an apology, I think," he said, "though I'm not entirely sure for what yet." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You were lied to. So was the room." He was quiet for a second. "We've funded that studio for 3 years. There was another child before yours. Hollis, I think." He watched my face. "You knew about that too." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He nodded slowly, the way a decent man nods when he realizes he's been the unwitting middle of someone else's machine, and he said, "There's going to be a review of the grants, all of them." He paused. "I suspect it won't be comfortable for your sister." It wasn't. "I'll tell you the shape of it because you deserve the consequences as much as the reveal, but I'll keep it honest. It was slow and bureaucratic and unsatisfying in the way real justice usually is. There were no handcuffs. Nobody went to jail. What happened was quieter and, in our small world, worse. The foundation suspended its grants to the Davenport studio pending review. The conservatory, which trades entirely on its reputation, did not renew Brynne's teaching affiliation for the following year. The Soft Focus website came down. The certificate stayed on the wall of an empty studio. And the people in that hall, 400 of them, parents and teachers and donors, the entire small ecosystem of who knows whom that a credential like Brynne's depends on, had all watched an 8-year-old point past her aunt to the back of the room. You can recover from a lawsuit. It's much harder to recover from a thing a child said sweetly into a microphone while everyone was already charmed. Carol called me the following week, the competent woman with the clipboard. She'd pulled the entry paperwork. Not for me, she said, for the conservatory's own file because something hadn't sat right with her since the rehearsal. She'd found 2 years of entries listing my daughter as an unnamed pupil of a studio that had given her 1 hour a week. She was, she said, obligated to flag it. I think she wanted to. People like Carol spend their lives keeping other people's paperwork honest and almost never get to watch it matter. "I just wanted you to know it's being handled correctly," Carol said. "I thought you'd want to hear that from someone." "I did," I said. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "No," Carol agreed. "But somebody has to, or none of it works. People like Carol are why anything is ever set right. I want that on the record. Posy won the scholarship, by the way. Of course she did. She'd have won it under any name. What changed was where it went. The award letter, when it came, was addressed to the teacher of record, and the conservatory had a quiet, awkward, entirely necessary conversation with my sister about who the teacher of record actually was, given what had unfolded at the finals in front of the entire committee. The teacher of record was corrected to Marit Ellery. The studio of record was corrected to a converted sunroom in a rented half-duplex. The $5,000 stipend was dispersed, after a delay and a form I had to sign 3 times, to the only household it had ever belonged in, the one with the broken piano. I didn't gloat. I want to be clear about that because I know revenge is satisfying to imagine. I didn't call my mother to crow. I didn't post anything. I cashed a check that should have been ours all along, and I bought my daughter exactly one thing with it. I had the C fixed. It cost $110 and a man with a felt-lined toolbox who spent an afternoon in my sunroom and left. And when he was gone, Posy came home from school and sat down and started Claire de Lune. And she got to the bar where the broken note used to live, and she hitched out of 2 years of habit. And then she heard the C ring out clean under her finger, and she stopped. She looked up at me. "It works," she said, like I'd performed a small miracle, and in a way I had, the only kind I could afford. She played the whole piece again, just to hear that one note land where it had never been allowed to land before. I stood in the doorway and let it undo me. $5,000 of stolen money, 2 years of a stolen name, 400 witnesses, a foundation review, a lawyer who told me I had nothing. And the entire war came down, in the end, to a single note finally ringing true in a rented room. That was the whole inheritance. That was everything I'd fought for. A child, playing freely on an instrument that no longer asked her to lean around a wound. If you've ever had to let your child speak a truth that the adults in your family had built an entire system to bury, I want to hear from you. What did it cost you, and was it worth it? I'll be reading. Brynne came to the duplex about a month later. Alone, no cream dress. She stood in my sunroom and looked at the upright, at the new key, the one that no longer hitched, and she said, "It sounds different now." "It's whole now," I said. She sat down. She didn't ask permission. We don't, in this family, ask permission for the wrong things, and we beg it for the right ones. She put her hands on the keys, my sister, the credential, and she played a few bars of something, and her wrists were beautiful. They always were, and there was nothing underneath them. She'd been given everything and learned to float a left hand and never once learned what it was for. "I told myself I was helping her," Brynne said, to the keys, not to me. "The grants, the name. I told myself a duplex couldn't open those doors." "You weren't entirely wrong about the doors," I said. "You were wrong about who I'd let stand in them." She nodded. She didn't apologize, not really, not in the way that would have let me off the hook of being angry. She did the thing my family does instead of apologizing, which is to admit a small true fact and hope you'll accept it as the whole settlement. "She really is better than I was," Brynne said again, the same sentence from the phone call, and this time I understood it was the closest she had to an apology, and I let it be enough because Posy was upstairs and I didn't want her growing up in a house where her mother kept score forever. "She's better than both of us," I said, because she told the truth on a stage when she was 8, and neither of us could do it at 36. "Let's make sure she stays that brave." Brynne left. We're not close. We may never be close. But Posy has an aunt who fixes her wrists on some Saturdays now, openly, with my name on the forms and Brynne's help underneath it where help belongs, and that is a smaller, truer arrangement than the one we had, and I'll take it. My parents I see at holidays, briefly, carefully, the way you handle something that once cut you. My mother has never said she was sorry. She has, exactly once, watched Posy play and not reached for the credit, and for my mother that is the same thing as falling to her knees. I'm not waiting for more. Waiting for my mother to become someone else was the lie I lived in longest, longer than the one they told about Posy, and I've stopped paying rent on it. Here is what I learned. The only wisdom I have, and I'll keep it to one breath. The people who taught you to disappear are counting on you to teach it to your children. And the bravest thing you will ever do is hand the truth back to the one person small enough to still believe she's allowed to tell it. Posy practices every evening now in the sunroom on a piano with no broken key. Sometimes she stops at the bar where the chipped C used to be, out of habit, and leans around a wound that isn't there. Then she remembers and she plays it clean and whole, and she looks up to find me in the room, not in the back anymore, never in the back again. And she smiles, and we keep going.